Hello and welcome to Lesson 3 of Global Development. This session is going to be looking at something called population pyramids. And these are ways to show the population structure or the demographic structure of different countries. Okay, so you're going to understand by the end of this session why demographic structures vary between countries and what that looks like when it comes to a population pyramid. So write the title down, and once you're ready to unpause the screen, please do so. So it's a bit of a recap, and I've got a couple of slides that I want to use to recap last session, which was on development indicators. What you've got here is a really handy graphic, actually, which shows you a couple of things. Now, what I want you to do is pause the screen and try and answer the two questions that are on the right-hand side. So on the right-hand side, it says, what does this graph show? So that's just describe it. Be as specific as you can. Work out what's going on the left-hand side of it and the right-hand side of it. And then try and work out what the graph is trying to suggest about those two stats and those two sort of axes of information. Once you think you've got an answer, you can unpause the screen and I'll explain it for you. Okay, so this graph shows a couple of things. Firstly, on the left-hand side, you've got a column of data which goes from 0 at the bottom to 1 at the top, and that shows HDI, or Human Development Index score. And hopefully you remember that HDI is made up of mean years of schooling, life expectancy from birth, and gross national income per person. Okay, people's average salaries in whatever country they are. So they come up with that, they roll it together, they stick it in the oven, and out comes this HDI score. And you can see here you've got USA at the top with an HDI score of 0.948. Then Italy, very closely following it. Then you've got Albania, Saudi Arabia, Madagascar, and Swaziland. Now, on the right-hand side, you've got some numbers, and those numbers represent the GDP per capita of those same countries. So you've got a range between 0 and 40,000, with the lowest score of Madagascar, the average GDP per person, so annual salary per person, $857 in Madagascar, whereas the USA it gets up to sort of just under 40,000. So that's what the graph shows. Okay, it's got a selection of countries around the world. Now, what it suggests about these two statistics is that actually the right-hand side GDP, which is wealth, effectively, isn't necessarily a good indicator for how developed a country is. So on the left-hand side, you've got wealth in terms of income, plus school, okay, mean years of schooling, plus health data, life expectancy. So you've got a combination of different factors to give you that score, and that shows you that those countries, and they've been deliberately chosen, those countries are much closer together than they would be if it was just based on wealth. If you look at the USA and Italy, for example, Italy and the USA effectively got exactly the same HDI, give or take 0.008. And that tells you that actually Italy have invested well in services like healthcare and education, as well as having, half decent incomes. That's not a small amount. Relative to the USA's income, it's low, but the USA aren't necessarily spending that money as well as could be spent to get them up to the HDI score. Although arguably you could say they're both so close to 1, how could they make that many improvements? What you see further down is a bit more stark. So if you take Saudi Arabia, which has a GDP of just under 14,000, and you compare it to Albania, which has a GDP of just under 5,000, it's nearly got 3 times the GDP of Albania, yet Saudi Arabia's got a lower HDI score. And that shows you that, and all of this suggests really that just because you've got a higher GDP, it doesn't mean that your HDI score is going to be high per se, because you have to spend that money wisely, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's the first recap from last session, which is comparing single measures with composite measures of development. And the second one is looking at these indicators, because I just want you to be aware of these factors, because they could appear in an exam, and knowing what these are is really, really handy. And these ones in particular are ones that come up fairly regularly. So what I'd like you to do with these is work out what each of them is, first and foremost. Don't have to write it down, but work out what each of them is. But then do write down what and how that indicator shows a place's level of development. So, for example, birth rate, which I know is the number of births per 1,000 of a population. That shows development because a high birth rate suggests a place is less developed, because it suggests there's less access to contraception. Okay, so healthcare is not as developed. It suggests that parents have to have more children because maybe some of them die due to high infant mortality, again suggesting there's lower healthcare standards, which suggests it's less developed. It might suggest that there's less education around or emancipation of women, for example. So maybe women aren't provided with the same opportunities for education as men, and therefore they have children earlier and they have more of them. And again, that is something which shows you it's got a less developed education system. And so high birth rate suggests less development for those reasons. Now, I don't expect you to write down every single reason why, but that's the key. I want you to just look at it and say, right, what is it first and foremost? If it's high or low, what does it show about a country's development and why? Okay, that's key. Now, that should take you a good 10 to 15 minutes to do properly. So what I'd like you to do, please, is pause your screen until you've completed all of those. If you don't know them, look them up. Now's your opportunity to get another chance to look them up. And then when you've completed this, you can unpause the screen and we'll carry on with the rest of the session. So, onto this session now, and onto this lesson, which is detailing population pyramids or population structure. And population structure is sort of defined as the numbers in and the distribution of different age groups in a population. But when I talk about population structure specifically, and when any geographer does, and the exam board do, they really mean what is the proportion of people who are 0 to 15? What is the proportion of people who are 65 plus, and what is the proportion of people who are between those two ages? Okay, and then we've got three names for those people. Those three groups of people represent your population structure. 0 to 15 we call the young dependents. Over 65 we call the elderly dependents, and anything between that, 16 to 64, are called the active population or the working population. So the 0 to 15 and the over 65s are both dependents, okay? And what that means is they essentially depend on the active population for the things they use, the services they use, education, pensions, retiring, that sort of thing. Healthcare services are far more used by people in those age categories, So they are more dependent. Now, the ratio, so the proportion between the young plus old and the workers, the ones in the middle, the active population, is really important. And the ratio between them we call our dependency ratio. And if the number of young and old dependents grows relative to the ones in the middle, then you get more pressure on services and more need for maybe taxes, or they change retirement ages, that sort of thing. And most countries in the developed world are certainly going through an aging process. Now, this graph is one way of showing those sort of proportions in a population, and where you've got the USA as the example. So in the year 2000, you can see that the USA's young dependents were approximately 20% of the population. The elderly dependents were about 11 or 12% of the population, so that makes up about 31%, which leaves in the middle the workers, the working population. That leaves 61%? Is that right? Have I done that right? 31, 60, 69%. Okay, so 69% of the population. But then you move on to 2050, and what you see is happening is there's a slight reduction in the young dependents, down to maybe 18, but there's a huge increase in the elderly dependents, up to maybe nearly 20%, so let's say 38%. All of a sudden now it's gone from 69% balancing 31 to 18 plus, 20, so 38%, and now 62. So that is an increasing dependency ratio. There is more pressure on these people in blue, the economically active, to actually provide the services that the young and the elderly dependents utilise. Okay, so that's called an ageing population. And most countries, like say in the developed world, are going through an ageing process. And that's why we're seeing retirement ages go up. That's why, we don't look at people in this country who are 65 and say they're retired automatically. Some of them are, most of them probably will be, but give it 10, 15 years, you won't be retiring until you're 67, 68. So that number will change to try and reduce that dependency ratio, which can cause sorts of issues for the working population. So we don't traditionally, though, show population structure in bar charts. We sort of do, but we've got specialised bar charts which break it down into individual age groups as well. And it also shows males and females. So population pyramids, they show the population structure of a place, and they divide it up into different ages, 5-year categories, and males and females. They show it as a population pyramid, but it doesn't always look, well, it very rarely looks like a pyramid, to be honest with you. And it's 2 bar charts basically, either side of each other, one for male, one for female, and the bars go outwards rather than up. Okay, and you'll see it in a second. And you can work out what percentage or number of a population might be. You can also compare boys with girls in certain age categories, that sort of thing. And they can give you an indication of how big the birth rate is and how big the death rate is, because we've already seen birth rate and death rate as an important thing at the start of this lesson, from working out how birth rates and death rates show development. So if you can see what they are on a population pyramid, you can see if that pyramid is for a developed country or not. So here's an example of a population pyramid, but on the next slide I've got a better one to show you instead. So this is the population pyramid for the United Kingdom. And I don't actually know the year that this was. I think it was the year 2000, maybe 2010. And this shows you the bar charts, stacked up on each other. Sorry about those things keep appearing. The left-hand side you've got males, on the right-hand side you've got females. And then up the middle, which is essentially your axis, you've got the age ranges, 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, all the way up to 100 plus. Okay? And then underneath, or at the bottom, this x-axis, you've got the numbers. Okay, this is in millions. So this looks like roughly 11 million-ish, and this one's about 10 million. And so what you've got here is about 21 million. No, that can't be right. Maybe this is the wrong thing. I don't actually think this is the United Kingdom. Maybe I'm wrong. Who cares? Oh no, this is the United States. Look, there you go. Look, you can see clearly it's the United States. Yeah, because the number would be too high. So it is about 21 million people in the United States are between 0 and 4. And there's slightly more boys than girls, okay? And then if you kind of equate that up, say roughly these bars are the same width. They pretty much are, aren't they? It's very straight-sided. 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, 140, 160, 180, 200, 220, 240, 260. And then it starts to drop down a little bit. And overall, you'd see that the population is probably around about 300 million, which is the population of the United States, approximately. So, what does this population pyramid show us? Well, a few things, okay? And again, you need to know what you're looking at to be able to spot it. Firstly, it shows us a few things about gender imbalance. Older people tend to be more female orientated. It's wider at the top on the right-hand side than on the left-hand side. There's a bit of a gender imbalance. The bars go up very steadily. You can see it's very straight-sided on both sides. Now, if that carries on, that shows us that whoever's born here or in the 0 to 4 age range, they're likely to survive up to, on average, well into their 60s, okay, or well into their 50s. And that, before any decline starts happening in the population, it's only really when people get to the kind of slightly older age ranges, which is what you'd expect. The birth rate is stable, again, because you can see year on year, it's about the same. If anything, it's going down slightly from sort of 20 or so years ago. And there's lots of people in every age category, which we've already identified shows us is quite a big population. You can see roughly, because we know that this bottom bar represents about 21 million people, as you go up the pyramid, okay, there's going to be a large numbers of 20 million. And there's not that many countries that are about 300 million in size, to be honest. So that's just a few things that this population pyramid shows us. But we haven't necessarily seen what it tells us about development. So you've got 3 population pyramids for 3 different countries. One of them you've just seen, okay? You've got the USA, Japan, and Mozambique. All right, so USA, Japan, and Mozambique. 3 contrasting pyramids in 3 different countries. Now, Mozambique is a less developed country, okay? I'll tell you that now, so there's no sort of ambiguity about that. The United States is a developed country, and Japan is a developed country. These are both developed countries. But Japan are kind of a few stages on from the United States of America in terms of their population pyramid. And you can see the big difference between Japan and the United States is here, in the young dependent age range. What do you think is happening there? All right. Now, what I'd like you to do is get these from 365, these three pyramids, and annotate them. So, like, draw lines around them using pages 216 and 17, which are scanned from the Highland Cow textbook, to tell me what's going on for each of these pyramids, and then linking it to development. So it's a really, really good activity to show you the contrasting pyramids and what they show. So over here, Mozambique, for example, the first thing we notice is the bottom is very wide. You know, if you look at the whole population, structurally speaking, most of the population are in the young dependents category. It's got a high birth rate. High birth rate, less developed country. It's also got a high death rate. How do we know? Because you look at how quickly the pyramid narrows very, very quickly. And that tells you that after every 5-year period, a large chunk, a significant chunk anyway, of the previous age ranges have died. Okay, they've died. So the death rate is high because, you know, every single 5-year period, deaths, and it goes in quite severely at the top. And there's very few people living past, 50, 60, etc. You compare that to a country like Japan or the United States, you look at just how many more people survive and what gives it this straight-sided appearance, which this certainly doesn't have. Okay, so use the annotations, or use the information from pages 216, 217, add them as annotations around your pyramids, so you've got a really good idea about how population pyramids show differing levels of development within a country. Japan's population is what we'd call an aged population. The United States is aging, and this one is a youthful population. And that tends to suggest, it tends to indicate how many people there are in the young dependents. Youthful, lots of young people. Elderly, lots of elderly people, okay, and aging, lots of aged people, if that makes sense. So get on with that. Again, that's going to take you a good 10 to 15 minutes to do properly. So pause the screen, and when you finish that, I'll do a bit of a summary recap. Okay, so straight-sided pyramids or more economically developed country pyramids, you should have identified things a bit like this, and from the notes in your book, you'll have more specifics. Don't worry about the necessarily less baby boys and baby girls and baby boys, but narrow base is a key here. Low birth rate. Okay, you should have identified that. You might have identified bulges that show maybe immigration or baby boom years. Women live longer than men. That's pretty much the same no matter what country you're looking at. And a broad shape at the top, so it tends to show people are surviving into old age much more than they would if they were in a less developed country. So they're the kind of things that you should have got from the notes in your book for both the USA and Japan. And an less economically developed pyramid, you should have seen wide base, high birth rate, high death rates, normal war, famine, disease, things that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be a problem in the developed countries. Women still live longer than men, but the narrow shape at the top means that there's low life expectancy, high death rates, that sort of thing. So again, I've got a couple of extra annotations that you may have added. Population pyramid is wide at the base, large population, tapers very quickly, all things that you can see in places like Kenya or Vietnam or Mozambique. And like I say, you've got those three examples to compare your pyramids from your notes already. Okay, so just finishing this off then, and it says homework, but you can obviously do this now as you're doing this from home. This is an explain question, a good example, good chance to practice an explain question. It says, explain 2 indicators that show a country's level of development. So this isn't necessarily talking about population pyramids here. This is really linking your knowledge from last lesson and the start of this session. But what I'd like you to do, in your book, write out this question. Leave yourself about 7-ish lines, because what I want you to do is think about what's this question is asking you. It says explain. First and foremost, you see the word explain or give reasons or suggest reasons, you are going to have to add connectives. You're going to have to develop your answer. It's worth 4 marks, okay, and there are 2 indicators you've got to explain. So you need to write at least 2 different indicators and then explain how they show a country's level of development. So pick 2 that you know, all right? Now I'm going to model one answer for you. You cannot use this one, so you're going to have to use 2 others, okay? I'm going to be a cheat and pick birth rate, so because I know a lot of you are going to use birth rate. So birth rate, the number of people born per 1,000. That's what I'd start. So I know what birth rate is. Okay, I've got to now explain how that shows a country's level of development. So a high birth rate suggests a country is less developed. That's 1 mark. Okay, birth rate, number of babies born per 1,000. If it's high, shows a country of less development. Tick. This is because it suggests there's less access to contraception. Tick, tick. There you go. That's my 2 marks for one of my indicators. Then you just have to simply do that same thing again for another indicator. So I'd like you to pick 2 indicators, not birth rate, and practice just describing how it shows level of development. So I didn't get the first mark until I said birth rate being high shows less development. That was the first mark. So if I'd said birth rate, number of babies born per 1,000 is low, showing more development, that would be worth a mark. Okay, and this is because it suggests that there is more access to contraception. That would be my second mark. Just as a word of warning, you can't do 2 for birth rate. There need to be 2 different indicators. So you can't say birth rate being high shows this, birth rate being low shows this, and get 4 marks. It has to be 2 indicators. Okay, because birth rate is just 1 indicator. So that is all I'd like you to do to finish off this session, because it, like I say, we're going to go back to population pyramids, specifically to India, and there's a good video recap I can show you as well. But it's an important concept, and students tend to forget population pyramids, so we're going to do it twice in this topic. It's quite important for us to do that. All right, so the last thing, the very final thing before you finish today, the importance of key terms cannot be overstated in this topic. So before you finish this session, I don't need to write anything down necessarily unless you haven't got any of this information or you really don't know. Just check to know, check to see that you know, or you can give a good definition or good stab at explaining what each of these 6 kind of key terms means. Now, you haven't necessarily encountered it just this lesson. It might be from previous lessons. But development, life expectancy, death rate, birth rate, GDP, inequality, and corruption. Okay, I would like you to see that you know what those terms mean, and that would be a good checkpoint for you to measure against. You're kind of ticking along nicely with all the key terms you're being faced with. All right. Once you've completed that, that will end this session. So thank you for listening. Well done for getting through it. I hope you've found that interesting and understood it really well, and I'll see you next time for Development Lesson 4.